You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we're back with another episode.
Yes.
You have anything for us today?
Yes, I do. Ooh. I can't remember the last time I was in this chair. This was a nice chair.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We didn't, I guess I kind of went on vacation, but we didn't even really, it wasn't even vacation. We just took our own personal vacation, I kind of feel like.
Yeah.
So
I heard you went to Utah.
I did.
Yeah.
Hung out with the Mormons. It was fun.
That's cool. All right. Actually, we have this is going to be a really short, I think. Really short episode. But I think it's an important one. That's why it's here.
Based on the paperwork, it does look like it's going to be short. Because they're usually significantly longer than that sheet of paper.
It's pretty short. This is an episode about a third generation Italian American in Milwaukee, a relative of a mafia family, and how they were part of that community. I'm going to be very upfront about this. I do not believe at all that this person was a mafia member, was a criminal, was anything of the sort. Despite that, the FBI still looked into him.
Thoroughly, or?
Not a whole lot. I mean, not like how they sometimes do for year after year after year.
Not like the gambling guy where they just followed him around for like 10 years and never saw anything.
Yeah, nothing like that. But they definitely, I think we've explained this before, but it's worth repeating because not everyone's going to remember everything ever said on here. The way the FBI used to work, I have no idea how they work now. The way they used to work is when they'd open an investigative file, it would run for 6 months. And then at 6 months, they would decide whether to keep running it or not. So this is more like a 6 month. It's basically a background check, more or less.
So how did this person get onto your radar to know to get this report? Does he just show up in tons of mafia-related criminal FBI files, and you just kept seeing this name over and over again? And you're like, who is this guy, or how did you get on?
Oh, it'll be really obvious once I say his name why it came up.
Oh, okay, okay.
But just in general, the way with the FBI files, when multiple people are mentioned in a file, they have like the index to the file of who's in it and what their FBI file number is if they have one. For quite a while, like it's less common for me now, but like when I was first doing this, I just, anytime there was a new name, I would get a new file. Mm-hmm. I mean, I knew who the name was. Like I said, it's going to be immediately obvious.
Okay.
But just in general, I'd be like, oh, here's somebody who's connected to these guys. Let's see what comes up. Because you never know. You don't know what direction things are going to go. Mm-hmm. All right. So you ready to hear the name of this person?
I am ready to hear this name.
Okay. We're going to talk about Dr. Vito Guardalabene.
Okay. But this is a much later Vito Guardalabene. Then.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
For the purposes of simplicity, I'm just going to call him Dr. Vito. He's born May 11th, 1909 in Milwaukee. His father is Giovanni Battista, also known as Pete. And his mother is Angela Bellante. Pete, listeners may recall, was one of the two brothers who were kind of involved in like the landfill garbage scam. Pete was actually briefly the mob boss. And of course, Pete's father, the original Vito, was the first mob boss.
Right.
Dr. Vito is the son and grandson of mob bosses, as well as like a nephew and whatever else.
So it's very understandable how he gets sucked into this world.
Right. Right. No matter what he would have done,
he would have been on somebody's radar.
He would have been on someone's radar just because he grew up with everybody.
And on top of that, he also just happens to share the name with the original mob boss, too, which I'm sure didn't do him any benefits either.
It doesn't probably help. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say this because it kind of violates my 50-year rule. Like mob boss Frank Balestrieri, he's got a grandson. And they named him Frank because that's the tradition.
Right.
But it's like, I don't know. That's a bold move. Like, you know that name carries some weight.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I guess I could say it. That isn't really saying anything about anybody, but just like, it's a bold name choice. He grows up with, his father, his grandfather. He's next door to another mob guy, Carlo DiMaggio. Another house over is another mob guy, Carmelo Zarcone. So, like, this whole block is like everybody's living as close to each other as possible. Like, not only are they all living in the Third Ward, because that's where the Italians lived, the mob guys really tried to be as close to each other as possible. So he grew up with everybody. He went to Lincoln High School and graduated in 1927, which is also the high school most of the Italian community went to. He attended Marquette University. He then graduated medical school in Minnesota in 1935. He did his residency in St. Paul. He then gets married in Chicago around 1940. Interestingly, perhaps, I don't know, his wife, not Italian. No mob connections whatsoever.
So that's your first clue that he probably isn't really involved in that world, right? Because isn't that kind of a thing they do, is to make sure that they're marrying somebody that is mob connected,
right? And that's the thing. I mean, it's not 100% one way or the other. I mean, there's mob guys who marry Irish, Polish, whatever women, and that doesn't make them not mob guys. But it is interesting that at this time, 1940. He's coming out of this tradition. He's still in that time frame where his father could basically have chosen a wife for him. And that clearly did not happen here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's going his own way. They have a daughter, Carla. Vito, Dr. Vito, was a World War II veteran. I'm not exactly sure what he did in World War II, but because he already had his medical license, I'm assuming it was not in combat. He was probably a medical officer.
Right.
Yeah. Afterwards, he sets up shop as a physician and surgeon in Milwaukee. He served on the staff of Deaconess Hospital and St. Michael Hospital in the Milwaukee area. The first time that I've ever seen him come up in an FBI file is on October 7th, 1961. He's running pretty good. Like, he's made it to like age 50 before he's even like mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So good job, Dr. Vito.
Kind of makes you think that he was probably really, really not involved if it took him that long to pull him into this.
Yeah. An informant said that he was known to treat hoodlums if they were injured during a crime. Allegedly, within the last 3 months, he had treated a man for gunshot wounds. The informant would not say who. And here, I would like to point out, that's not even that unusual. I know that this could sound shady, but also, like, that's what a doctor does.
Yeah.
There's doctor-patient confidentiality is a real thing. If you show up at a doctor's office with a gunshot wound, the doctor's going to treat you for your gunshot wound. They're not going to ask you, did you just come from a robbery? Like, that's not, they don't care about that. They're going to treat you.
Mm-hmm. And totally, he could have just been being a good Samaritan. You know, like, he could just have been, somebody walked in with a gunshot wound and, yeah, like you said, he just treated him. It's not that he's doing anything nefarious. He's not working with the mafia. He's just like, hey, some poor kid came in with a bullet. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah. All right. So here's the big moment, and here's the moment why it's worth having an episode. Despite, it's nice to clear a guy. That's nice too sometimes. December 27th, 1961. There is a testimonial dinner for Dr. Vito at Gallagher's, with dinner running $25 a plate. Testimonial dinners, I don't even know if they do these anymore. You come in and you pay your thing, and it's in honor of somebody, and people give all these speeches and say how great they are for the community, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, at this point, he must have been well known enough as a doctor that he could have one of these parties. Gallagher's being one of Frank Balistrieri's clubs. The dinner was arranged by Dominic Frinzi, the mob attorney. Also present at the testimonial dinner were Frank Balistrieri, Peter Balistrieri, Buster Balistrieri, John Aliotto, Frank Lagelbo, Sam Ferreira, Steve DeSalvo, John Rizzo, Louis Fazio, Harold and Bernard Klein, Jaime Corin, who I have no idea who that is, and August Maniaci. Somebody there related to Izzy Pogreb, who had recently been murdered, who was there, which surprised the informant that reported on the attendance. What was really odd is all these guys are here, which isn't like that's not odd in itself, because of course it's like Balstrade's club.
Mm-hmm.
They're all here at the same time as this other group of people. Judge Robert Curley, Judge Thaddeus Pruss, Judge Robert Hanson, Judge Harvey Nealon, Judge William O'Neill, Judge Michael Sullivan, Judge Chris Seraphim, City Attorney John Fleming, Clerk of Court Raymond Fleming, Sheriff George Witkowski, Deputy District Attorney Ladin DeBrazzo, County Supervisor Joseph Greco, Angelo Provenzano, Union Representatives Ben Barwick, Phil Valley, Roy Lane, Frank Ranney, William Frank, the president of the City Bank, and, various other people. These two very different groups of people together at the same meeting. And we learn after the fact that while on the face of it, this is a testimonial dinner for Dr. Vito, this actually serves as the party to congratulate Frank for becoming the mob boss. This is December 61. He had already been boss for a little while, but this is like the big celebration of that event for him. So he's celebrating that while supposedly it's supposed to be for Dr. Vito. When Dr. Vito realizes that, he is not happy with Frank. And just in general, I think it's a weird mix because, some of these guys, we know they're mob guys. They have regular lives outside of that. They own bars and restaurants and everything else. People know who they are. The name that really jumps out at me is Louis Fazio, because Louis Fazio, he has a history of child sex trafficking, burglary, murder, etc. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading into this way too much, but it seems weird to me that he's at the same party as all these city officials and judges and everything else, because if they should see him, they should be like, we're getting the hell out of here. Maybe I don't know. Maybe he was just that well loved, or people didn't recognize his face, or they were like, you're going to have one bad guy in a big party. I don't know, but it's just weird to me that they would all be hanging out together.
Well, and that's part of what makes me question. So, a lot of the people that you probably mentioned on the list on the Mafia side, they probably have respectable, like you said, they have respectable day jobs.
Yeah.
They probably mince with some of these people on a regular basis anyways, just from their businesses and things like that.
Sure.
It would be interesting to know what the dynamic of this party was. Were the Mafia people on one side of the bar, and then the, Vito and all these other politicians and stuff on the other side of the bar? Or was this, supposed to be like this was all one big party that they were celebrating together?
Yeah, I don't know how much interaction there was. It seems weird to me. And maybe, like I said, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe it's not weird at all, because, when you got a room with a couple hundred people, you're going to have that. If you're in a room with 100 people, there's people in that room who have done wonderful things and have done terrible things, and you don't necessarily know who they are.
You have no idea who the good ones are and who the bad ones are, per se.
So there's that. But it's still, the whole thing is weird, because even though Frank had just recently become boss, he had, for years, he had been getting bad publicity before he was ever boss. So it's not like the judges and everyone else didn't know who Frank was and they were going to a Frank club. Even that's weird to me, where they would be like, yeah, we're not going to go buy a way out, because $25 in 1961 is a significant dinner. It's very weird. The whole thing is very weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
That you wouldn't find some other venue for this party.
Well, and it's also weird. Didn't you say that the mob lawyer is the one that actually set it all up?
Yeah.
Which he's
not just the mob lawyer. He's a fairly respected defense attorney.
So he might have just had a relationship with Vito that set this up.
Yeah.
And then it's just weird.
Yeah.
And it almost, just that part of it makes me wonder, like, was this guy more connected than than the evidence shows?
I don't think so.
Because, I mean, just to have all those people at his party, that just seems weird. Because it would be one thing if, like, the top level mafia people are there, because that probably, being that Vito is a respected Italian in the community, he's going to cross paths with these people, because these people are property owners, and not on top of that, like we talked about, I don't know if at this point in time, but what was it, like the retired pension type thing that the Italians had?
Yeah.
Half of them were on that board or whatever, the mafia members.
Yeah.
And Vito seems like a kind of guy that could have been on that board as well. Because he was just a respected person. And so
that makes sense.
I don't know. Once you start going down those names and you start getting deeper down into the lower level mafia people, the more the muscle of it. Yeah. That's where it becomes weird to me.
Yeah. Something's off. And apparently, again, anytime you're dealing with FBI files, like, a lot of this is secondhand. There were multiple informants at this party. I don't know who all the informants were, but apparently they were part of this group. One of them told the FBI that when Dr. Vito found out of who, like, he didn't send out the invitations. When he found out how many of these guys were there, apparently he actually got sick to his stomach, because he's like, this is supposed to be like my celebration, and clearly this is just Frank inviting his buddies. Like, that was not the point. Whether he knew specifically that it was a party to honor Frank becoming mob boss, I don't know. I don't know if Dr. Vito would be aware of that. He probably wouldn't be aware of that. But he obviously knew who the shady people in town were. Like, everybody knew because they were in the papers all the time.
That's weird.
Yeah.
And why would Frank have brought all these people there? Like, for what reason? What was the money going toward? Do we know what the money was going toward? Like, obviously
no,
it was like $25 a meal, but I assume that went to something.
I don't know. Like, no. It didn't specify, which led me to believe it probably just went to Frank. But I don't know. I don't know. It didn't say.
It's interesting. Okay.
There's another time, a few months later, where Frank Belstry was seen sitting at a table having dinner with Dominic Frinzi and Dr. Vito at Gallagher's. Nothing weird going on, but just, that they do actually hang out sometimes. On another occasion, Joe Guerrera was in from Kansas City, and he had dinner there with Steve DeSalvo, Buster Belstry, Frank Belstry, Peter Belstry, Dr. Vito, and a few other men. So throwing that out there just to kind of counterbalance that, like, he wasn't thrilled that these mob guys were at his party, because that wasn't the kind of party it was supposed to be. But he's not opposed to hanging out with these guys. These are still people who grew up in the community, and he knew. A lot of these guys he probably knew in grade school and high school and everything else. So it's not like he meets them and he's like, oh, you're the famous burglar, let's hang out. Like, he just always knew these guys.
He grew up with them.
Yeah.
Well, and not to mention that, I mean, when he was a kid, his father and his grandfather? His father,
grandfather,
were
both
mob
of his neighbors were all,
Like, he was probably deeper into this than we realize, just because, but it was just by association, because he knew everybody.
Right.
And had a relationship with everybody, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Okay. An FBI agent spoke with an informant in September 1963. The informant said that Dr. Vito was possibly a member of the Mafia. He was, of course, known to treat them for medical problems in the past. That's, again, not evidence. So the possibly is even like a kind of a exaggeration. I don't know. At this point, Dr. Vito is already going down in health. He's getting in his mid-50s. And despite being a doctor, apparently not the healthiest guy. He suffers a heart attack in his mid-50s, going downhill. The Ad Lib nightclub, another Frank Belstry club, held a sending-off party for Dr. Vito on November 9th, 1967. The sending off was that he was going to visit his daughter, who was now living in Spain. I have no idea what ever became of her. She may very well still be alive. I don't know. Cannot find out where she ended up. Like before, at the sending off party, there were numerous hoodlums and gamblers, including Dominic Principe, Vito Sedita, Steve DeSalvo, Joe Caminiti, John Aliotto, Frank and Peter Balestrieri, Joseph Balestrieri Sr., which is Frank and Peter's dad, Nick Fucarino, Louis Fazio, etc., etc., etc. Not so much the good guys this time, just the shady guys.
Right.
So again, like, he's clearly buddies with them. Then finally, on September 3rd, 1968, Dr. Vito dies at age 59. He suffered a second stroke, ends up in the hospital where they find that he also has gallbladder problems. And then he passes from what they call cerebral artery arteriosclerosis. Very short episode. Just throwing that out there that, like, they opened a file on this guy basically because he's running in the same circles and he's got that name.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is it. Like, they find nothing. Like, the best they can do is that he occasionally has dinner with like, his childhood friends who are questionable. He just, like, they never allege that he's, you know, even betting on horses. They nothing. So that's I wish I had more, like, nice things to say about, you know, how great of a doctor and everything he was. That's not even really the point of this. The point is just, like, he got wrapped up and stuff just by the very fact of him being born. Like,
yeah.
Like,
well, and
what a crap
he
deal.
didn't help himself since he maintained relationships with these people
No.
for years too.
No,
I mean,
you're absolutely right. If he really wanted to, he could have moved to Madison or somewhere
just
else.
separated himself from. He didn't need to be hanging out at Frank Balestrieri clubs and things like that.
No, but I'm not going to blame him for that either.
Well, and I guess for clarification of this is that, did all Italians hang out at Frank Balestrieri clubs? That's a pretty broad question. But... Well, I mean, you know what I mean, though? Like, are we talking about such a small community that in the Third Ward, pretty much all the clubs were owned by Frank Balestrieri?
No.
So if you were going to go to a bar, you had to go to a Frank bar, pretty much, or a...
It's not quite to that extent. And by the time that Frank was running clubs, like, he wasn't running them in the Third Ward. Like, they had kind of moved out. Some was in the downtown area, some was on what they call the East Side. Like, you didn't have to, but obviously the Italians all knew each other from growing up together. So it certainly wouldn't be unusual. It's not a large community. Even today, it's not a large community. And in Milwaukee, they've got, you know, the annual celebration called Festa, like on the Summerfest grounds. And it's a huge party where everybody celebrates their Italian heritage. And even though, like, Milwaukee's got other, I don't know what you call ethnic festivals, that's the big one. Mm-hmm. That's the one that people love. And they're not even, like, the biggest group. Obviously, like, the Germans far outnumber them. The Italian Fest, like, that's just how much this community sticks together and knows each other and everything else. You know, they've got their own monthly newspaper and everything. So it's, yeah, again, it's not to suggest anything shady. It's just that's the community. They know each other, and that's they hang out. I don't know. Yeah,
because, like, as you were going through this episode, I kind of got to the point where I'm thinking, like, being with all the connections that he did have to different people within the Mafia, I don't know how you can outrightly say he wasn't deeper into the Mafia than we realize. But then at the same time, I also have to, again, and I think we run into this a lot with this podcast, where we have to step back and remember that this is 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And things were a lot different back then. And, like, part of me wonders is that if you were an Italian of any success, could you really avoid interactions with Frank Balestrieri? Because he was just that big of a deal in the Italian community.
I think that's certainly part of it.
You know,
and And it goes both ways. I mean, if you grew up in the Italian community and then, one of the guys you grew up with becomes a successful Italian doctor, he's the guy you're going to go to as your doctor, right? I'm not saying that they didn't all necessarily use him as their doctor, but you would be more inclined to support him. Like, it's just the whole thing. Like, it's a problem, and I'm always trying to be very careful with my language because it's something that has happened for as long as this sort of thing has been around, where if you're not careful how you say things, they sound bad.
Mm-hmm.
Because the closeness of the Italian community does help the mafia prosper. That in and of itself is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it kind of generated a bad outcome because all the Italians were kind of protecting the mafia, right? In a way, because
they wouldn't say it that way, but they kind of were because they had loyalty to each other.
Right. That trait as a whole is not a bad thing by any means.
Right.
I mean, it's just happened to be that this is an example where it led to something kind of negative.
Right.
And I mean, and I guess that I'll close out I don't know how well you'll be able to answer this question, but
sure.
So I'm walking down the street in the 3rd Ward. I run into a mafia member in this area. Your perception...
Okay. And I'm assuming you mean back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day.
Okay.
So let's go back whenever...
today you wouldn't see that.
Right. But let's just say that, and I know that this is so-and-so.
Yeah.
I mean, did the mafia have the persona back then where you were immediately afraid of that guy? Or was it kind of like... there wasn't so much of a stigma against the mafia, even though they were doing bad things at times?
I think it depends on the individual. I don't think most people were afraid of Frank, even though they knew, who he was. I think most people, would go to his club, think he was a nice guy. They might chat with him at the bar or something. Whereas other people, Steve DeSalvo, if you ran into Steve DeSalvo, he had the reputation of being the more violent guy. So you might be more afraid of him. But I mean, unless you have some reason to be afraid, like they're not like going around beating up random people.
Yeah.
I would say more often than not, you're probably not afraid of them. They're guys you grew up with.
Yeah.
I mean, let's put it like this. This is a very bad example. But because we don't pre-write these, you're going to get a bad example. I mean, we grew up with people as kids and in high school and everything else. And some of them, and I'm not naming names, but some of them may be, into heroin or meth now.
Mm.
And if I run into them, like, I'm not going to not talk to them and I'm not going to not whatever. But I'm also not afraid they're going to try to sell me meth.
Or try to slip you an injection or something,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and actually, that is kind of a bad example, but that's also a very good example where it does show that line where I mean, underneath it all, what a person becomes, there's still that person that you knew your entire life. So you're not going to just disown somebody because of something they maybe have become.
Thank you. That was the point. So thank you for finding what I was trying to get at. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's a very bad comparison, but the point being is, if you grow up together, you don't see these guys. I mean, they're mob guys, but you don't see them as mob guys
because they're still just that person that you grew up with.
Right.
Yeah. But it is, at the same time, though, the whole thing of him having them at these parties and stuff, that one is a little weird.
Yeah.
Because I think in your example, you see that person, you'll be fine with them.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not inviting them to parties and things like that anymore. Yeah. Because you just kind of grow apart from each other.
Yeah,
and
I guess.
that's where I think in this story the funny line is, because he obviously had, I mean, if he was choosing to have these events at Frank's bars and all of these people were there, he had stronger relationships then than just what you're talking about in your example.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. It's so hard. This is something like we have selected information, and it's 60 years ago. So so I don't know, but bottom line, I'm giving Dr. Vito a pass. I don't think he did anything wrong. Like he had a few shady friends, but I'm not going to hold that against him.
Yeah, and maybe he took bullets out of somebody that got a bullet from a crime. I mean, I'd like to think that any doctor would do that for if somebody came in and was going to die from a bullet shot. He's not going to ask questions on why. Yeah. He's just going to take the bullet out so the person doesn't die.
Right,
so.
Right.
All right. Well, with that, we went down quite a rabbit hole with this one, so I think we can wrap this up.
This is supposed to be super short.
Do you got anything else with that one, or sure?
No, this is it for that. I do want to give a preview, a very super short preview of the next one because I'm really excited about it.
Okay. And
it's going to go back into the connection between the Mafia and the Wisconsin cheese business. I know we did an episode quite a while back.
Yeah, and Grande cheese.
Yep. Yeah. And we did like the super, super short version. We're going to come back and we're going to do a very specific one. And I'm excited about it because as we record this today, the Fond du Lac County Medical Examiner's Office is sending me an autopsy report.
Ooh.
So hopefully by next week, I have this autopsy report that I can report back on about somebody who was allegedly a victim of the disputes in the cheese business. So
okay, so this is going to all be tied back to Grande cheese again.
Well,
not a different.
I don't want to. You keep saying that name, and I don't know if I mean.
Let's make it very clear: Grande cheese is not owned by or controlled by the mafia. It is just a cheese company that happens to have some mafia history in it.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yes, that is correct. But yes, there. I mean, I guess you said it. Yes, there's definitely a Grande cheese connection here.
Okay. I didn't know if we were going off some other completely different segment or area of Wisconsin cheese, or if
we're back there.
Okay.
One of these days they're gonna get real mad at me, but I'm just reporting what I got, just the facts, man.
So, all right. With that, we will be back in 2 weeks with that episode. We thank everybody for tuning in. As just a reminder, always, we do have a Patreon. You can check that out at patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia. Gavin does need some more subscribers because he's in a battle with Berto, and Berto's winning right now.
Oh, my goodness.
So, if you can help him out, he would really appreciate it.
I don't mind. I'm more impressed that Berto was able to do it so quickly.
With that, Gavin, you got contact info for him?
Yeah, pretty much at this point. Your best and only way to reach me is MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. You can try to reach through Facebook, but guess what? I don't have a Facebook anymore. So if you send a message, it's just going to go to Eric, which I'm sure, that's fine too. But if you're trying to reach me, it's not me.
And it's going to go to Eric, and Eric is going to respond to you and say, "Hi, this is Eric. Please send this request to MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com."
Yeah.
And Gavin will respond to you because he cannot access this Facebook account.
I cannot access my own author page anymore. So yeah, just use the email.
Save yourself the time and email them. And save me some time because, it takes me forever to get onto his author page. It takes Facebook like 20 years to log into it. So.
Yeah, Facebook is not a great,
With that, we thank everybody for the continued support. We'll see you back here in 1 week for the Patreon. If you're a Patreon member, if not, you're going to go over to patreon.com and get subscribed.
Wow.
Or 2 weeks with a regular episode. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia Podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.